Yes. This is senior management, and that's the assistant. The assistant is named Lilu. And have you seen the film called The Fifth Element, starring Bruce Willis? No. So the fifth element is the element of love, and she's called Lilu. So that's where Lilu gets her name. And I think we're done now. Any questions? Okay. This planet is in the midst of abrupt, irreversible climate change, and I'm going to explain that as the presentation proceeds. And a couple of lines come to mind from Edward Abbey, who was a Southwestern American writer, speaker, and public figure, and who I came this close to meeting, but then he died right before I showed up. The audacity of some people. And he wrote, if the situation is hopeless, there's nothing to worry about. And that's where we are with respect to abrupt, irreversible climate change. And he also said, action is the antidote to despair. So should you be feeling despair or know people that are, then I would encourage you to take action. And I'm going to point out some examples. But basically, if you can make one person feel like a decent human being in a day, that's more than I accomplish most days. So that's a goal to strive for. I'm going to try to answer 3 questions with this presentation. What is anthropogenic climate change? And I suspect that most people in the audience, perhaps all of you, already know the answer to that question. So I'll be brief with my response. How do we know it is occurring, and how bad is it? So first, what is it? And anthropogenic climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns, most notably including precipitation. And as anthropogenic or human-caused climate change, that's what differentiates anthropogenic from the other changes in climate that have happened throughout planetary history. What's interesting is that this one is the most abrupt event in planetary history. We all know about burning fossil fuels that create these greenhouse gases. So if you drove here in a car, what you were really driving is a greenhouse on wheels. And you can tell when you go out on a summer day and get into your car because that heat has been captured in the greenhouse by the windows. So how do we know? I mean, I get told every day via email by somebody I've never heard of before that we can't possibly know what's going on with respect to climate change because we just haven't studied long enough to know, and there's a bunch of cycles that are happening out there all the time. And sure enough, we've had direct measurements by NOAA since 1850, which is quite a long time to have temperatures here measured here and there. And that's been long enough, and scientists are intelligent enough to take account of things like the urban heat island effect. In urban areas where there's lots of concrete, that warms up during the day, and at night, that concrete releases the heat. So that, for example, in Phoenix, Arizona, it routinely doesn't drop below 80 degrees Fahrenheit at night. That's pretty warm, and it's because of all that concrete and asphalt out there. There are other means besides direct measurements since 1850. There are tree rings. Probably most of you are familiar with dendrochronology, the science of measuring tree rings and their width. There's marine and freshwater sediments that can be used to determine what happened in the past. When we go back to the deep past, we have things like stalagmites and how they accumulate over time, as well as a variety of isotopes. Here, for example, we have oxygen isotopes. The common isotope of oxygen is 16, that's the molecular weight, but this is, and I don't think you can see it from there, this is 18. This is an isotope that is pretty uncommon, and those uncommon isotopes can tell us a lot about what has happened in planetary history. Not that long ago, this year, we received the State of the Global Climate 2023 that came out on March 19th, 2024, and it has a couple of interesting things to say. The key messages are the State of the Global Climate Report confirms 2023 as the hottest year by a wide margin. It's not even close. And 2024 will almost certainly break that record. Records were broken for ocean heat, sea level rise, Antarctic sea ice loss, and glacier retreat. Everywhere we look, there are symptoms of ongoing anthropogenic climate change and its acceleration. Extreme weather undermines socioeconomic development, and here we're talking about mostly the global south, where people are having a very difficult time holding together this set of living arrangements because it's just so hot that it makes it very difficult to grow food, for example. And if you live in an agrarian community with which most of us are unfamiliar in this country at our age, then it's very difficult to grow food because the climate has shifted so much. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, probably most of you are familiar with the IPCC. This is an international organization that was created in 1988 during the Ronald Reagan administration. And one of the consequences of being created during that time was we had a president in this country who was a denier of all kinds of reality, including anthropogenic climate change. So let's turn to Michael Oppenheimer, Albert G. Milbank, Professor of Geosciences and International Affairs in the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University. And he wrote at the Environmental Defense Fund website way back in November 2007 that the US government saw the creation of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as a way to prevent the activism stimulated by my colleagues and me from controlling the policy agenda. That's why the IPCC was created, to replace the Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases. The Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases had far more interesting, riveting, and terrifying things to say than did the IPCC. So the IPCC was essentially designed to fail. Its predecessor, the Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases, wrote in a report in 1985 that beyond 1 degree C may elicit rapid, unpredictable, and nonlinear responses that could lead to extensive ecosystem damage. In other words, at 1 degree C, we will see the self-reinforcing feedback loops that we've been warned about by an economist of all things, William Nordhaus, who went on to win a Nobel Prize, of course. He warned us about 2 degrees C, and for some reason, the IPCC and almost everybody else on the planet thought 2 degrees C was a good idea. Coming from an economist? It's not called the dismal science for no good reason, folks. David Spratt, is climate writer and speaker, in October 2014 indicated that self-reinforcing feedback loops had been triggered at half a degree C. So they've been underway for quite some time. So let's turn to the IPCC again, which was designed to fail. In their October 8th, 2018 report, global warming of 1.5 degrees, that's 1.5 degrees C, obviously. And they indicate in one unbelievably long paragraph, these global events of human-driven change far exceed the rates of change driven by geophysical or biosphere forces that have altered the Earth system trajectory in the past. And they cite 2 peer-reviewed publications. Even abrupt geophysical events do not approach rates of human-driven change. How close? Not even close. We'll get to that shortly. Less than a year later, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change produced its special report on the ocean cryosphere and changing climate, and concluded with way too many words that an overheated ocean was responsible for the irreversibility of climate change. the ocean is too hot. So we cannot cool the ocean. That's where more than 70% of the heat goes that strikes the planet. We don't understand how to cool the ocean. It's an overheated ocean that makes climate change irreversible. How inconvenient. So, abrupt, irreversible climate change was reported nearly 5 years ago by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and you never hear about it. You watch the news, you never hear about it. Corporate media outlets do not tell us the important factors, one of which is the fact that we have passed the Rubicon of abrupt and irreversible climate change. So all these things are happening, plus fires. Of course, we've heard about the fires in the Pacific Northwest in Canada. Volcanism, which is a product of climate change because terrestrial plates are losing weight because the ice is melting, the glaciers are melting. They're dumping that water into marine plates, and the consequence is those plates are shifting back and forth and causing an increased amount of volcanoes and earthquakes. And we're also in the midst of a mass extinction event, not the 6th, as you've frequently heard, but at least the 9th. Enough about that. The really important factor is that the rapid rate of environmental change, quote, restricts the ability of organisms, populations, or communities to respond. Ecological entities have difficulty responding to abrupt events. And ecologists have known this for many, many years and find it astonishing that other people don't understand it. If you're embedded within an ecosystem and the ecosystem is changing very rapidly, then you as an organism or as a population or as a community can't keep up with those changes. We evolved through natural selection only over relatively long periods of time. We have to have multiple generations with random mutations that allow us to adapt to that kind of change. So that's inconvenient. The IPCC, again designed to fail, projected that the rate of environmental change exceeds the ability of vertebrates to adapt by 10,000 times. 10,000 times, that's a lot. Mammals can't keep up either, and I'm citing peer-reviewed literature in all of these cases. Tardigrades almost certainly will not survive. This is the go-to group of organisms that is going to survive anything, the tardigrades, because they've been so successful in the past. But they almost certainly will not survive, according to scientific reports, which is part of the Nature series of peer-reviewed publications. Dr. Henry G. is a paleontologist and evolutionary biologist and senior editor at Nature, the most renowned of publications in the peer-reviewed world. And he concluded in Scientific American, if we're going to write about human extinction, we'd better start writing now, because it's happening so quickly that we better start writing now, or we're going to miss the chance. How inconvenient. This mass extinction event that we keep hearing is the 6th, and that I keep reading almost every day has not started yet, began, according to the father of diversity, E.O. Wilson, Edward Orenthal Wilson, that it began sometime before 1992, because you don't get a book published in 15 minutes or even a day. And he pointed out that we have initiated the 6th great extinction, not knowing at the time that it was at least the 9th. Science Advances is part of the renowned series in the Science group of peer-reviewed publications. And Gerardo Ceballos and colleagues produced a paper on January 19th, 2015. And upon release of this paper, Gerardo, the lead author, said life would take many millions of years to recover and our species itself would likely disappear early on. I'm stunned that we made it this long. And that doesn't make me the most popular person in the room almost ever. I used to get invited to parties, for example. Anyway, so I talked about what it is very briefly, because you already know. How do we know it's occurring? I gave a few examples. And how bad is it? It's really, really bad. I could stop right there and then we could go home and have ice cream. But no.
You should have brought some.
Yes, I should have brought some. Oh, an oversight. Kevin, next time, will you write that down? In its October 8th, 2018 global warming of 1.5 degrees, the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, addressed abrupt climate change and indicated these global events of human-driven change far exceed the rates of change driven by physical or biosphere forces that have altered the Earth's trajectory in the past. The bottom line, abrupt geophysical events do not approach rates of human-driven change. We're driving to extinction more than 200 species a day. The background rate is less than 200 species a year. So if you're looking for the very definition of #winning, we're it. The mass extinction event about 66 million years ago that drove the dinosaurs to extinction, along with a lot of other species. And this, in fact, was the 6th known mass extinction event. But good news, mammals were nothing before that asteroid struck the Yucatan Peninsula. Mammals were almost non-existent. They were just little tiny species. There was nothing big like humans. And then, because of the demise in dinosaurs and many other species, mammals rose to dominance. The situation was changed. Mammals got to come into a far greater existence, and then we came along. We wouldn't be here today were it not for that asteroid striking the Yucatan Peninsula millions of years ago. So, yay! Cheer on the asteroids. How bad is it? This is a renowned paper, again, part of the Nature series in Scientific Reports. Co-extinctions annihilate planetary life during extreme environmental change. And in this case, the extreme environmental change means 5 or 6 degrees C above the 1750 baseline. We're already beyond 2, so now we're talking about 3 or 4 more degrees beyond that point. And that causes the extinction of all life on Earth. However, even though both Strona and Bradshaw are ecologists, they downplay the importance of the rate of environmental change and indicate that an additional 3 or 4 more C above where we're currently at over the course of the next few centuries will cause the extinction of all life on Earth. And things are occurring much more rapidly than that. Now, they did leave a little room for something resembling hope. In this article, they said a rogue, seemingly desert Earth wandering across the universe could still have some tiny chance of blooming again under some lucky and unlikely circumstances. Whew, we're saved. Except that we almost certainly will not be among the species that survive, because we're big, gushy, mushy things, right? We don't have any defenses. We can't crawl into a hole at the bottom of the ocean. All we have is our brains, which we think are amazing and have saved us from a lot of trouble so far, but man, have they created a lot of trouble for us along the way. Oh, and if you live in New England, yeah, every time I've moved in the last 15 years, people said it was for one reason: to escape climate change. So I moved to Belize, Central America. Let me tell you, if the planet is warming, the last place you want to go is the tropics or the subtropics. So that's where I went. because I knew that it didn't matter. And then my partner's youngest sister was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. And so we came back to New York. Oh, you came back because of climate change. So that's your survival strategy. Then we moved to Florida to get her father into a facility for his obvious dementia difficulties, because he's, what is he, 100,000 years old now? Or 90 something? Yeah, so of course he's showing signs of not being cognitively as capable as he once was. So we moved to Florida, and again, I'm accused of moving there because of climate change. And then finally, we moved to Vermont. Again, you know the story. But New England is warming faster than the rest of the planet, according to a paper in the peer-reviewed journal Climate in 2021. And I don't know if there's a relationship between Stephen Young and Joshua Young. They're at different universities. But New England is warming faster than the rest of the planet. So apparently I didn't move here to escape climate change either, if you're interested in evidence. Most people who write to me aren't interested in evidence at all. The ongoing mass extinction event that is occurring right now, at least the 9th, is underlain by abrupt, irreversible climate change. Burke et al. In the renowned Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, quite a few years ago, relied upon the IPCC's representative concentration pathways, and representative concentration pathways ignore all self-reinforcing feedback loops, of which I've identified 68 in an essay that I stopped updating in 2015. So we include just one or two of those, and things are going to be a lot worse than indicated by the representative concentration pathways. Climates like those of the Pliocene, when it was 2 to 3 degrees C warmer than it is now, will prevail as soon as 2030, ignoring all self-reinforcing feedback loops, ignoring the aerosol masking effect, and so on, and will persist under climate stabilization scenarios, which don't exist. There's no such thing as a climate stabilization scenario. In fact, in another paper in Nature, almost 2 years after this previous one, indicated we project that future disruption of ecological assemblages as a result of climate change will be abrupt, because within any given ecological assemblage, and here again we're talking about populations, communities, and species, the exposure of most species to climate conditions beyond their realized niche limits occurs almost simultaneously, and that will begin before 2030. So again, 2 peer-reviewed papers that indicate we're not going to make it until 2030, and they ignore the representative concentration pathways, which include ignoring self-reinforcing feedback loops. And just to indicate there is no way out, many people have told me that all we need to do is stop civilization, as if that would be a good idea. We all have come to depend upon this set of living arrangements, civilization, for our own survival. Can you imagine not having a grocery store to go to? Civilization is defined as the ability to grow, store, and distribute grains at a large scale. And we do that with all kinds of grains at this point in a very sophisticated set of living arrangements that result from our ability to grow, store, and distribute grains at a large scale. So Tim Garrett, professor at the University of Utah, in 5 peer-reviewed papers indicates that in a paper called No Way Out, the Double Bind in Seeking Global Prosperity Along Mitigated Climate Change. And he indicates that, to answer the question, no, there's no way out. But of course, the paper wouldn't be 17 pages long if he just stopped with there's no way out, would there? So civilization itself is a heat engine no matter how it's powered. If it uses solar panels and wind turbines and wave power and every imaginable thing you can think of that people call renewable, it still doesn't work. It still heats the planet. And here's a paper in the Journal of Political Economy indicating that hierarchy, that is civilization, arose as a result of the shift to dependence on appropriable cereal grains. So, the ability to grow, store, and distribute grains at a large scale. So, if we're interested in maintaining civilization, what that means is a cool, stable climate. That's what's required to grow, store, and distribute grains at a large scale. Such conditions arose on Earth several thousand years ago, leading to several other civilizations, and this one, industrial civilization, which arose in approximately 1750. And you'll notice how rare, looking back through planetary history, this is. We are here in what has been, for the last 250 years or so, a relatively stable, cool climate, cool enough that we can grow grains. Look at how many times that's happened before. None. None, as it turns out. We're going back a long way here. 600 million years. Long before there were humans on the planet. And now we have triggered events that are taking us beyond this cool climate. We have already increased global average temperature by more than 2°C, and we're headed for much warmer conditions in the near future. So why don't we just eliminate civilization then? I get this question all the time. I almost always get it as a statement. We must do this. Well, there's a couple of reasons rooted in logic. Something I rarely encounter on a daily basis. One, the aerosol masking effect, which almost nobody has ever heard of. I didn't hear about it until I left active life on campus, moved to a property where I lived off-grid for about 8 years, and then moved to Belize and lived off-grid for more than 2 years. And it was only a few years into that experience that I discovered the aerosol masking effect. It's the best kept secret in climate science. Nobody writes about it, even though there's been more than 24 papers published in peer-reviewed journals on this topic since 1929. Yet I didn't know anything about it, and I've been studying climate change since the early 1980s. Oh, and then there's the meltdown of nuclear facilities, of course, which is inconvenient, to say the least. So let's talk about each of these quite briefly. The aerosol masking effect results from industrial activity, as does the production of greenhouse gases that trap the heat. In this case, tiny particles known as aerosols go up into the atmosphere and prevent the sun from sneaking through the atmosphere and heating up the planet. If you can't have solar rays strike the planet, then you can't warm the planet. So we have these aerosols produced by industrial activity that go up there and act like little mirrors or umbrellas that keep the light from getting through. According to Professor James E. Hansen, who you probably know as basically the founder of contemporary climate science. And the aerosols fall out of the atmosphere in about 5 days. And he has said this in many presentations, written it in numerous peer-reviewed papers, and in many interviews as well. The cooling resulting from current aerosols in the atmosphere is 55% globally, 133% over land. Most of us live over land, or on land rather. And this is from an open access journal called Nature Communications. So what that means is if we terminate civilization right now, let's say we all agree we don't want industrial civilization around anymore because I heard it was a bad thing. So let's everybody just turn off the switch. What will happen within a relatively few days is that the heat will increase by 133% over land, where all of us live. So we're currently at above 2, 133% of 2 is an additional 2.67 degrees. So now we're at 4.67 degrees above the baseline, and we got there in 5 days. The very definition of inconvenient. I mentioned this paper by Guy and colleagues, written in 2021, and it's a more recent attempt to describe the aerosol masking effect and its consequences, and it indicates that the aerosol masking effect increases by 55% globally, 133% over land. So this comes from a peer-reviewed open access source. Also, if we eliminate civilization, all the nuclear power plants in the world are going to melt down because people are not going to go to work if you're not paying them. One of the positive consequences of this set of living arrangements is that when we go to work, we get paid. It's not a lot, I know, but it's a little. Most of the money goes to the billionaires. A little bit trickles down to us. The implosion of nuclear facilities will cause the ionizing radiation to be released into the atmosphere, stripping away stratospheric ozone. And this was demonstrated in the 2021 film Finch, so filmmakers know about it. Why don't you read about it in the newspaper? Why aren't we being told about this? That the meltdown of the nuclear power plants will cause so rapid of an increase in global average temperature that it will almost certainly kill us all. And by all, I mean the tardigrades and everything else on the planet. I get to this point and I think, I'm such a bummer. And then I look at the faces of some of the people and I think, I'm such a bummer. The greatest threat we face is an ice-free Arctic Ocean. Because when we lose the ice floating on the Arctic Ocean, the ice and snow floating on the Arctic Ocean, the planet will warm up so fast in such a short period of time that it will be astonishing. It will be far beyond what any organism has experienced so far in planetary history. This was predicted to occur by Harvard professor James Anderson, who famously led the research team that discovered the link between chlorofluorocarbons and the loss of ozone over Antarctica. So this is not just your regular third-class dummy, right? This is an intelligent human being. And he predicted, and I'll show you the quote shortly, that that would happen in 2023, and then 3 years and a couple of months later, University of San Diego Professor Jennifer McKinnon said it would happen a year before that. And here we are. This is 2024 by my last count, and we made it through without having these catastrophic events. James Anderson was quoted by Forbes on January 15, 2018, quote, "The chance there will be permanent ice in the Arctic after 2022 is essentially zero, or in this case, 100%. Because here it is, 2024, and we have not had an ice-free Arctic Ocean. And then 3 years and a couple of months later, Jennifer McKinnon at the University of California, San Diego, indicated that Arctic sea ice would be gone by next year and only develop in the winter months, the very definition of an ice-free Arctic Ocean. So they were wrong. And hallelujah, thank you for that. What happens when we lose ice and snow floating on the Arctic Ocean? That question was taken on by Pistone and colleagues in a paper that was published June 20th, 2019. And what they find is an ice-free Arctic Ocean, the first year that that happens, is equivalent to the effect of 1 trillion tons of CO2 emissions. 1 trillion tons of CO2 emissions. These results suggest that the additional heating due to complete Arctic sea ice loss would hasten global warming by an estimated 25 years. It actually would be 25 of the most recent years when we have really ratcheted up our production of carbon dioxide emissions. So that's really inconvenient. And we've been fortunate that it hasn't happened so far, because these renowned professors have indicated that it would have happened by now. So let's take a look at where we are. The National Snow and Ice Data Center, the NSIDC, indicated, I downloaded this yesterday, that here, the blue line is where we are right now. This is the extent or the cover of Arctic sea ice and snow. So this is the ice and snow floating on the Arctic Ocean. And you can see that the blue line is not taking a favorable path. But the lowest level so far is the dashed line from 2012. And it looks like we're going to sneak through okay. In fact, this is the close-up version. And the blue line, again, is where we're at. And 2012, we're still slightly above the 2012 year. The U.S. Navy Postgraduate School produces a 6-month ensemble forecast. And I strongly recommend that you follow that. The forecast released in early April will indicate what the forecast says for late September. And that will tell us all we need to know about whether we're going to have an ice-free Arctic Ocean. And here's the URL for this. For those of you who are interested, I'll show it on the next slide as well. And this is where we are as of yesterday. The dotted line is 2012. This is where we are now. We're considerably lower than we have been on average, but it looks like the forecast indicates that we're going to have about 3.5 million square kilometers of ice floating on the Arctic Ocean in late September at the nadir, at the low point. So, and this forecast has been very scientifically conservative so far, and I think it's highly reliable. So it looks like we're going to get through another year with ice and snow floating on the Arctic Ocean. And that only means good things for all of us who are fans of life on Earth. I'll stop right there. And I would love to take some of your questions or comments, and what I'd really like is answers if you have them. That'd be nice. Yeah, Craig?
What's the definition of an ice-free Arctic? Like absolutely zero ice? Some ice?
Good question. It's anything 1 million square kilometers or less.
And there should be 3 million by September?
A little over 3.5. So 1 million because it's really difficult to catch them all. So I don't have a good figure here. But here, for example, you can see all the snow and ice here. Well, imagine when it gets shrunk and shrunk and shrunk even further, there's going to be little bits left in some of these caves and fjords and various places. So it's very difficult to count all the way down to 1 million square kilometers. So the people who study ice and snow in the Arctic Ocean, claim that anything less than 1 million square kilometers is close enough to zero to count as zero. And yes, we're going to finish the year with considerably more than that, about 3.5 million square kilometers. So this is very good news. However, you know, these are no idiots who predicted that we would have an ice-free Arctic Ocean before now. And so when will it happen? Could be next year, could be the year after that. We don't really know. There's a lot of variation in year-to-year extent of ice. And that hasn't been accounted for yet, to my knowledge. So it's a little tough to say. But People ask me all the time, how long do I have to live? That's everybody's favorite question for me. I get it via email every day. How long do I have? They usually phrase it somewhat differently to make them sound not quite so narcissistic, but that's really what everybody means, right? Is when am I going to die? And I used to think it would be a good idea to have it stamped on everybody's forehead, but they couldn't see it. So then you meet somebody and you go, oh, geez, right? Because you're going to get you're going to get hit by lightning in 12 seconds, and I don't want to be near you. But lately, I've been telling people you have 3 minutes. You have 3 minutes to live. And with every breath, you get a reset. Why don't you try living like that? Why don't you try living as if the moments actually matter? Because they do. What do we remember? We remember only moments. We remember reading a book. Do we remember every paragraph? No. If we're lucky, we remember the theme of the book, whether it was good or not. That's it. 3 minutes. And with every breath, you get a reset. There are worse ways to live. You know, up until about 1970, it was considered perfectly ethical for the medical community to not tell people that they had a terminal diagnosis. They would just not tell them. Sometimes they'd tell the family members, sometimes they wouldn't. We know with great certainty this person is going to die in 6 months or 6 years or whatever, but they just didn't tell them until about 1970, at which point suddenly somebody realized the ethics of that, and we need to start telling people when they have a terminal diagnosis. Two things come to mind. First of all, with respect to climate change, it's the same thing. An icy Arctic Ocean produces such a rapid rate of environmental change that we don't survive. None of us, and perhaps none of all life on Earth. And I was going to say another thing, because I had in the back of my mind something, brilliant that I was going to say, and I saved it until now. But as I told my medical doctor a couple of years ago, I've got CRS when I went in to see her, and it's rising to the fore again. Yeah, I can't remember shit. So I was going to say something, I'm pretty sure it was important.
Birth?
Whatever. Earth?
Birth.
Birth. That's it. Wow.
She might have heard you say that once.
See, this is why senior management is senior management. Yes, birth is a sexually transmitted disease that is proven fatal in every case. And yet, people don't accept it. You get to be 12 or 14 years old and you decide, I'm going to live forever. No, you're not. It's interesting because 5-year-olds, nobody lives more in the moment than a 5-year-old. And then 7 years later, like that person doesn't even exist anymore. I'm going to live forever. Oh. Thank you all for coming. I'll hang around as long as you would like, and probably have some place more important you can go, like to the